Hello, I'm Geraldine and these are my novel opinions. Today I'm going to be doing a roundup of my reading in July and August. I thought I'd do them in two, partly because my first video, my last one, was the first 6 months of the year, and so that gave me another 2 months to catch up on. But also I thought it would be quite handy because I didn't have a particularly good reading month in July. I read 4 books and I would normally read 5 or 6. But unfortunately, I had a very good reading August. So I've got 12 books to catch you up on today. So I'll try not to go into too much detail about them. The first book I read in July was The List of Suspicious Things. That's very difficult to say. The List of Suspicious Things by Jennie Godfrey. This had a very interesting premise. A young girl, I think she's 12 or 13, she's living in Yorkshire in the 70s while the Yorkshire Ripper is active, and she decides to see if she can find out the identity of the Ripper. But under that is a commentary on other prejudices and so on deemed acceptable by society. So there's racism, sexism, the attitude towards sex workers, of course, domestic violence, and even child abuse. But unfortunately, the plot of the Yorkshire Ripper rather gets lost in all that. Also I found the writing a little bit stodgy, and the dialogue was rather cliched and unrealistic, which I thought was a shame because it was a wasted opportunity. It was a very good idea for a book. So I was a little bit sorry about that one. Next up was Nesting by Roisin O'Donnell. It was startlingly well written, but unfortunately for me, it was so good that it made me not enjoy it, because it's a story of a woman who's in a coercive control marriage, and how the court system, the housing system and all that kind of works against someone in that position. It's set in Ireland, but the same is the case in many other countries, including the UK. It was so well written that I felt tense the whole time I was reading it, and that is a testament to the author's brilliant writing. But unfortunately I couldn't say that I enjoyed it. Not that you're supposed to enjoy a book like that exactly, but I just didn't enjoy the experience of reading it. But it is very, very well written. The third book I read was Strange Pictures by Uketsu. This is a series of mysteries around pictures that have been drawn, where people follow the clues to solve them. It was very pacey and quite good fun to read, and there are lots of twists and turns. But unfortunately, I found it a little bit convoluted, a little bit juvenile in places. But it was fun though, so I'm glad I read it. Not sure whether I'm going to read Strange Houses, I think is his other one. But who knows, maybe I will. The last book I read in July was Brotherless Night by V.V. Ganeshananthan. This was a fascinating book about the Sri Lankan Civil War, which I didn't really know very much about. Utterly heartbreaking in places, because it's about how sometimes you have to make difficult decisions when the situation isn't always black and white. So what would be the moral decision to make, one way or the other? I think did this one win the Women's Prize? I think it did. But yes, highly recommended. I've really very much enjoyed it. The first book I read in August was Butcher by Joyce Carol Oates. I've been meaning to read Joyce Carol Oates for ages, and this is the first one I've got round to. It's about a doctor in the 1850s who does the most appalling experiments on women, especially gynecological experiments. Now, my problem with this is that while his experiments were indeed awful and nothing would reduce the suffering of his victims, On the other hand, he was performing these experiments on lower class women, indentured servants, slaves, and the like. And I'm not sure that at that time it would have seemed as appalling as we find it now. I think what Oates was trying to do was trying to show him to be a hypocrite, because in other ways he was very progressive. He was an abolitionist. He didn't believe in committing corporal punishment against domestic servants. And he believed that lunacy, as it was called then, was an illness rather than demonic possession. And I think she was trying to juxtapose those two stances in his case, that while he believed those things, he was also performing these appalling experiments for his own gain. And I can see the point she was making, but I don't think it would have been seen as hypocrisy back then. But it is a very good read. The next book I read was The First Witch of Boston by Andrea Catalano. I've got mixed feelings about this. The author is clearly a very skilled writer. Her prose style is very strong, apart from the fact that unfortunately she made the decision to use some faux oldie-worldy language, which always irritates me. It's not accurate, so don't use it. But anyway, her decision, not mine. But also she obviously done a lot of very good research, because it's very loosely based on a real person. But on the other hand, while she'd done all that, she'd ended up with a book which was populated by caricatures, and the plot was just a rather thin bodice ripper in the end. So again, another good opportunity wasted, I think. The next book I read was Dusk by Robbie Arnott. Now, Simon Savidge has absolutely raved about this book, and I can totally see why. I didn't have quite the reaction that he did, but I did enjoy it enormously. It's very much a book of two halves. I don't want to say too much, but the first half is character driven, and it kind of dwells on finding kindness in unexpected places and under difficult circumstances. But then it becomes a much more plot driven thriller, which was undeniably very exciting, but I think it was a little bit predictable. However, having said all that, the best character by far was the Tasmanian Highland scenery. I mean, they weren't obvious descriptions, they were kind of melded into the narrative, but you really got a feeling of being there, and the wilderness around you and the cold weather. It was so well done. Then I started on my Booker long list reading. My first book was One Boat by Jonathan Buckley. Mixed feelings again about this one. It's about a woman who has gone to a small Greek village to mourn the loss of her father, and she went to this same village 9 years beforehand to mourn the loss of her mother. Might have been the other way around, her mother and father, I can't remember which. And she meets some of the same characters that she met the first time round. I found it a little bit difficult to tell sometimes whether the stories she was telling were set in the present or 9 years ago, so I found that a little bit confusing. Some bits of it were utterly absorbing, others less so. She's also writing notes. She had written notes the first time she went, and she's writing notes again. And I did think that the author was poking fun at her over flowery language, but as I went on, I thought, no, I don't think he is. But ultimately, I thought, I don't really know what this book is trying to tell me. So it was good in parts, but overall, meh. Then I went on to Audition by Katie Kitamura. Now this is a book that divides people, but I absolutely loved it. It's got very spare prose, which is just my style. I don't get on with flowery descriptive passages. And sometimes it is difficult to know what's going on. But when I got to the end, I had exactly the same experience as a booktuber called Ray. We both got to the end and were convinced we knew what had been going on, and we were quite surprised afterwards to find that other people had different theories about what was going on. But I won't go into any more detail on that, because it's one of those books you can't say too much about without giving stuff away. Bob the Bookerer and Eric Anderson have both done very good reviews on this book, so I'd recommend you go and listen to them as well as Ray's, and sort of drop out before they start giving spoilers, because as I said, there's not an awful lot you can say about this book without spoiling it a little bit. My next Booker book was Universality by Natasha Brown. Again, this seemed to be a theme with this year's Booker books, as far as I've got into the list. It's another book that I enjoyed while I was reading it, but when I got to the end, I thought, yes, but so what? I didn't really understand what it was trying to tell me. There were definitely narratives about racism, classism, and the anti-woke movement, but I really didn't understand what the author wanted me to take away from that. So, as I say, excellent writing, and I really enjoyed the story while I was reading it, but I came away with a little bit of a feeling of disappointment that I didn't know, what it was all about. The last Booker long listy that I've read so far is The Rest of Our Lives by Ben Markovits. Again, a book that I really enjoyed reading, but I'm not quite sure what the point was by the end of it. Some people have compared it to All Fours by Miranda July. I can't really see the comparison apart from the fact that it's about two people who don't want to go home or avoiding going home, but the reasons are very different and the way they're going about it is very different. In All Fours, it's a woman who's supposed to be going on a long car journey but doesn't, whereas in The Rest of Our Lives, the protagonist is supposed to be just dropping his daughter off at college and then coming home, but then he decides to go on a long drive. So in some ways it's the complete opposite. There's a lot in the story about the "it's hard to be a white man these days" narrative, but I don't think the author really explored it well enough for the reader to really have a good think about that and see what they think about it. It didn't really seem to fit in with the rest of the story, so I'm not quite sure what we're supposed to take away from that. And finally, I read The Coin. Now, this is another book that divides people. I really enjoyed it while I was reading it. It's there's a fashion at the moment for stories about unhinged women, and this is another one of them. She's a complex character. She's horrible. She's a crashing snob, but on the other hand, she, in some respects, she has very high moral values, and she really cares about certain people, and she works hard to make sure that that things are all right for them. She's got a job as a teacher, and she's very dedicated at that. She's got an unorthodox style, as you'd expect, but she works hard to make sure that the boys in her class are well and happy. Again, I don't want to say too much about it, but by the end, I was less happy with it. And again, I thought, so what? I enjoyed getting to the end, but I'm not quite sure what it was trying to tell me. Well, that's my reading for July and August. I will be starting, well, actually, I'll be starting today, which is, as I'm recording, is the 31st of August. I'll be starting on Flesh by David Saloy. So that will be the first of my roundup when I do the end of September roundup. Let's see how many more bookers I can squeeze in. It depends as they become available from the library. I've got a few out at the moment, so there'll be a few more. But I hope to do that video at the end of September. So I will see you again then. Bye.